If everyone can continue to find their seat and finish their conversation, we're going to start in just a few seconds. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to our 10th event this year. This is our decade event. I think it's our 10th anniversary. That's what I looked up. My name is Steve Sheldon. I am a former president and director of the Orange County Water District. Myself and Jeff Thomas have been hosting this event for many, many years. Jeff and I serve as co-chair, and we're just very proud to be able to have made this our 10th event. We're also very excited to be back here at the Grand Californian. The Disney Resort always does a wonderful job. I want to thank some of the representatives from the Disney Resort. David Onko, the legal counsel. Is David here? I know David's coming. I saw Frank Della Vara, the director of environmental affairs. Frank's right here. Thank you, Frank. You've been here every time, and we so appreciate everything that you've done here for us. Thank you. It's great. You guys have just done a fabulous time. Debbie Mills, environmental project manager. Greg Deems and the banquets, and of course all the banquet staff, and of course the entertainment team that does all the lovely decor and staging. Thank you to the Disneyland Resort. You guys are great. Our theme this year is finding water, and finding water is very important. It's very good. Finding reliable water is even more really important, and we'll be talking about that. I think reliable water is a great theme to have. We just kind of gotten over our 5-year drought or 5 years in the desert, and we're looking at how to make up for that deficit. We've been in the desert for 5 years, and now we have a little rain, so we're going to hear a lot of ideas about how we can work to get more water back into our aquifer and our infrastructure. And so we'll hear from the panelists and how they propose that we do that to manage the water supply, to prepare for emergencies, and more ideas. Before we get going to the program, I do want to thank some of the sponsors of our different aspects of the program. Mesa Water is our luncheon sponsor. I saw Jim Fissler here from Mesa, other folks. Irvine Ranch Water District, our program sponsor. Geoscience, thank IRWD. Geoscience, our session sponsor. And all of the table, associate, breakfast, and chamber sponsors, that's all listed in the program. They all help make this one big event, so thank you to all of you. At this time, I want to bring up Jeff Thomas. Jeff has been the co-chair with me, and Jeff's going to say a few words. He gets the opportunity to introduce the dignitaries that are here, the other local elected officials, and of course, we're stoked that the Weathercaster of the year of the decade, Fritz Coleman, will be our MC, and Jeff will bring Fritz up and introduce him. So, Jeff, thank you, and it's all yours.
Thank you. All right. Good morning, everybody. This is great. Great everybody joins us again this year. I get the pleasure of announcing a few people just at the beginning here to thank. And from our MODOC board, first off, I'd like to just acknowledge some of the directors that are here. Wayne Osborne, who's our president. We've also got Director Brett Barbary, Larry Dick, Joan Finnegan. Good morning, Joan. Sat Tamarbucci. I know Sat's here. I saw him. And Megan Hughes Schneider. So that's from the MODOC board. Thank you. Orange County Water District. I haven't seen Dennis Bilodeau yet, but he could be here. I know Kathy Green is here. I saw Kathy. Phil Anthony, Sean DeWayne, Vince Sarmiento, James Vanderbilt, Dina Wynn. Bruce Whitaker is here. I saw Bruce. Good morning. And Steve Sheldon, of course, and Roger Yo. That would be the Orange County Water District Board as well. Now, I get the pleasure, too. We have VIPs, and I want, every time I do VIPs, I always feel weird because everybody here is as important as anybody else, particularly those that have really never been in the water world. We want to thank you for getting up and getting early, coming down, seeing us. We have a lot of water people here. We also have a lot of people here who are connected to some of our very good friends within government as well. From U.S. Senate officers, this is Chris Barwick, Staff Assistant to Officer Senator Dianne Feinstein. Thank you for coming. Robert Banuelos. Robert is the field representative for Congressman Lou Correa. Thank you for being here as well. I believe we have somebody here from Congresswoman Mimi Walters' office too. And if you're here, thank you for attending, and please give our very best to the Congresswoman. California State Senate, Scott Carpenter, District Director. He's with the Senator John Morlock. If you're here, thank you for being here. And then District Staff Representative for Senator Janet Nguyen, who is supposed to be here as well. Jesse Benron, Assemblywoman Sharon Quirk Silva is here. Thank you. And Sean Rodriguez with Assemblymember Tom Daly. Thank you for being here as well. Now, we do have Frank Delavera, Director of Environmental Affairs. Thank you. Thank you very much. I got to meet some of your colleagues, too. Thank you for all the work that you've all done for us, all the good things that Disney does for us every time. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd also like to give a special shout out to Directors Barbary, Osborne, Bilodeau, and Green for serving on the Planning Committee, putting this together. And what we are going to do next, and what we do as a nation yesterday was, or 2 days ago, was the 14th, right? Flag Day. So we get to honor our great nation. If you would please stand and join me in our Pledge of Allegiance as we put our hands over our heart and honor our great country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our Master of Ceremonies today is Fritz Coleman. He's one of Southern California's most iconic weathermen, that's for sure. I was telling Fritz I actually got to see him do a stand-up routine about 20 plus years ago, maybe even a little longer than that. And he is absolutely a hysterical comedian if you've ever gotten to see his stand-up act too. But Fritz has been with NBC since 1982, and he began as a weather forecaster, and after 2 years, he moved to weekdays. Fritz has been recognized by many newspapers as the best weathercaster, and was named Treasure of Los Angeles. That's really a nice title. By the city of Los Angeles, and also holds the title of honorary mayor. As Fritz is well known for his humor, it comes as no surprise that he's a longtime stand-up comic. He has performed at multiple California cities and locations, comedy clubs, including Improv and the Ice House. He has received 4 Los Angeles area Emmy Awards for his work at NBC and his comedy series and specials. Fritz has dedicated much of his time to charitable activities and has been honored by many organizations for his service. He is heavily involved in NBC4's involvement in goodwill initiatives, as well as a signature program, I'm a Volunteer. Fritz has written, produced, and starred in 3 one-man plays, including one titled Tonight at 11, which was an inside look at a typical newscast. When Fritz is not delivering the news, he's performing stand-up, and he can be found running, rollerblading, and skiing, all which result in leg breaks if you do them long enough, that seems like. He lives in the San Fernando Valley. He has 2 sons and a daughter. Please join me and Steve honoring Fritz Coleman. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. It was a very tepid response. This is the happiest place on earth. Good morning. I'm so happy to be here today. There's no more important issue on our planet right now, even though we got a temporary reprieve with above normal rainfall that was not predicted by any weathercaster, incidentally. We had written off El Nino, done a post-mortem, and then suddenly we got a bounty of rain. But our problems will never be over in Southern California when it comes to water distribution and conservation. This is a big year for me. I'm celebrating my 35th anniversary doing the weather at Channel 4. I admit it's an incredible accomplishment. 35 years being a weatherman in a city with no ongoing weather. It's an amazing. It's like being the Pope of the atheists. It makes no sense that I have extracted a paycheck for this scam of a profession for 35 years. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that those of us who are not considered eye candy in the business even survive the transition to high definition. But I'm living testimonial to the fact that you can get by without looks in television. I'm so happy to be here today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. As I was telling Eleanor and a couple other folks, during the drought, NBC committed a good amount of money to doing some reporting on the drought, not only in Southern California, but around the state. And we would do town hall meetings, and we went all over and did several in Orange County. And I was telling Eleanor that the awareness about the issue of water was no more active than we found it in Orange County. The turnout, we had 400 or 500 people turn out at these town hall meetings, far exceeding what it was in LA, Ventura County, and the other spots we went, Riverside, San Bernardino County. And there are lots of reasons for that. One is sort of the way that you've approached the infrastructure, particularly in areas like Irvine. But we were so impressed with how folks like the Water District here have been able to raise awareness about the water issue in Southern California. This is before we had the bounty of rain. So I applaud you, and this is another sort of a manifestation of the awareness of the county to the water issue. And we were also talking about the number of stories that we have done about the frustration of stormwater capture in Southern California. And I know we have a representative of Senator Feinstein's office here tonight, and she is one of the people who raised not only California, but the nation's awareness about this issue, and she's sort of been our advocate in Washington, so we appreciate her help with that. And I'm happy to be a part of this program today. I'm going to learn so much, and now I'll step to the podium and do my prepared remarks. Anyway, we're going to have a lot of fun. We'll hope to have you out of here by Father's Day. H2O, you know, is a simple chemical compound, but not so simple to manage. In every country, every U.S. state, every county in California for that matter, there is a different story about how water reaches homes and businesses. Orange County alone has more than 25 water and wastewater agencies. 25. Pretty amazing number. They worked diligently and have this last year to respond to the governor's mandatory conservation order, so much so that some water districts were caught unprepared to see their sales drop by over 30%. They were forced to reduce sales revenue by more than a third. But at the same time, they increased spending for outreach to convince their customers to use less of their product. It's a sort of a conundrum. Customers were using less, but still saw rate increases and were very confused and mistrusting of the rate increases. Now, before we dive in, I'd like to give you the lay of the land. Our speakers are incredibly accomplished in all of their various fields. However, we will try and keep speaker introductions short so that we might have more time to hear what they have to say. Their bios are included in your program. Secondly, we ask our speakers to please try and keep to your allotted time so that all of our speakers can get the opportunity to cover their topics and to allow some time for our moderators and guests to ask various questions. And the important thing is we want to get to your questions too. To help move us along, speakers will hear this sound when you have 2 minutes remaining, before we have security and the TSA remove you from the stage. When you hear this sound, that means your time is up, and take a Tums. We're going to have a great jump into the OC today. Okay, first crank up, a hard cut back as you hit the wall. There's a screaming bottom curve, so watch out. Remember, rip it, roll it, and punch it. Finding Nemo. Let's do it. All right, welcome to session one. In our first session, we're titling this On the Waterfront.
Hey, Stella!
We're going to hear from Professor David Sedlak from the University of California, Berkeley, and author of Water 4.0, The Past, present, and future of the world's most vital resource. David will talk about 4 water revolutions and try and predict if the water industry will reinvent how it manages water after our historic drought, or if it'll just fall back into the same old routine. But before we hear David, here's a look at your local water forecast. Hi, Fritz Coleman here to give you your water forecast for California and beautiful Orange County. We had some real highs and lows this past year, extreme weather patterns. At this same time last year, 83% of California was in severe drought during a punishing 5-year dry spell. This season's record rainfall has left less than 8% of California in drought. What a difference a year makes, folks. We experienced some severe thunderstorms in February 2017 that wreaked havoc on Oroville Dam's emergency spillway and called for a flood warning, causing 150,000 people to be evacuated. Thankfully, it held up and everyone was safe. California is now on heightened alert that its water infrastructure may not be as sound as we thought it was or should be, which means we're seeing increased pressure on these areas of the country to get funding for the California water projects. Are Californians willing to pass another water bond so soon after the passage of Prop 1? Will California get its fair share of U.S. funding? Only time will tell. While Northerners were grappling with Oroville, Southern California was able to rely on Prado Dam. Thanks to a deviation from the Army Corps of Engineers, additional storm water was captured behind the dam and slowly released down the Santa Ana River into recharge basins and ultimately into the Orange County groundwater basin. Projections are looking good that we will be able to store water behind the dam at 505 feet above mean sea level year-round in the very near future. If you're a skier, one of the millions of people who rely on water delivered from Northern California, then you were relieved to hear that the state snowpack is at 198% of the average. On average, the snowpack supplies about 30% of California's water needs as it melts in the spring and early summer. Interested in more on the water supply front? Water levels in Lake Oroville, the state water project's principal reservoir, are at 101% of the average level. Moving that snowmelt safely to the Central Valley and to Southern California is a whole other issue. The 50-year-old water infrastructure that moves this water is outdated, unreliable, and dependent on levees that put our clean water supply at risk from earthquakes and sea level rise. About 100 alternatives have been explored since 2009. 100! Alas, the California water fix emerged as the likely solution to the problem. Price tag for the dual tunnel fix? $17 billion. Water reliability does not come for free. In 2016, we saw the completion of significant environmental work for the fix. Will the fix fix our fix on imported water? Now that's a mouthful. We are fixated to know what will happen. Stay tuned. We also saw a thick marine layer of confusion on consumers' faces as they were asked to cut back water usage but pay more for water. The average Californian used just 58.1 gallons of water a day in January 2017. That is the lowest residential use since the state started tracking usage in 2014. Congratulations, Californians. You stepped up, now pay up? Very confusing message. Water districts had to explain rate structures and make compelling arguments for the increases even when consumers were using less water. Some agencies were more successful than others, but bottom line, some trust was lost. We also saw some onshore and offshore flows in Carlsbad and northern and central Orange County as a desal project and initial expansion of the groundwater replenishment system were in full swing to help local communities weather the relentless drought and offset what Mother Nature couldn't deliver. Projections look good for local reliability as the final expansion of the GWRS is designed, and it looks a little cloudy with a possible chance of building a desal project in Huntington Beach. We'll know more when the coastal eddies, the commission, makes some key decisions later this year. There was a refreshing gust of wind when the State Water Resources Control Board concluded that it is feasible to use recycled water directly as drinking water, provided that certain research and key knowledge gaps are addressed. It looks promising that regs will be passed soon. But then we got a little bit of the cold shoulder from the board when communities were not given full credit for water recycling when meeting conservation mandates. Ultimately, conditions warmed up and OC was able to get credit for its infrastructure investments and not only meet the emergency drought mandates, but often exceed them. Now let's take a look at our rainfall figures, shall we? Average rainfall in Orange County is 14 inches. We started the decade off real strong at 21 inches, and then it just went downhill from there. 7 years later, we're beginning to see an uptick with almost 20 inches of rain so far in 2017. We just have to make up for what we didn't get over the last 6 years. No sweat. We'll just put in that request with Mother Nature. Moving on to the groundwater front. Orange County groundwater demands are rising. Currently, local retail agencies need 380,000 acre-feet of water. Their demand is projected to increase to 425,000 acre-feet by 2019-2020. In terms of supplies available to put back into the groundwater basin, this fiscal year, we have about 437,000 acre-feet of water, and an estimated 57,000 feet of that will be untouched to help refill the basin. In 2019-2020, we'll still be able to bank some water in the basin, but only about 11,000 acre-feet because of the increased demands and because we're assuming an average winter. So folks, what does this all mean? We can only predict so much of what Mother Nature has in store for us. We have to prepare for the dry years and prepare to capture and move as much water as we can during the good years. We have to plan well in advance to meet future water demands. If we all keep using water wisely and look to new technologies like reuse and desal to bring clean and reliable water to California and Orange County, then our future is looking sunny and bright with a chance of just a few showers. Back to you now to do your part to conserve water and engage in water decisions happening in your community. Mr. David Sedlak, ladies and gentlemen. Don't sit in the chair where Snow White's going to sit, David.
Oh, that's a hard choice.
Those are nice chairs.
Oh, okay. I can stand? Good, good. Thanks, Fritz. Thanks for coming out here today, everyone. Thank you for having me. As we just heard in that talk, there's nothing like a crisis to focus people's attention. And whether that crisis is real or perceived, it still makes a difference. Because in times of crisis, people are willing to act differently. In times of crisis, people are willing to break the rules to get things done. And in times of crisis, people are willing to spend money. But crisis is not a time to really make differences in our infrastructure. As President John Kennedy said in his 1962 State of the Union address, the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. So we find ourselves here at a unique position where the attention of the public is focused on our water infrastructure and our water needs, and the sun is shining. And so the question before us is whether we're going to change the way in which we deliver water to California. How do I change the slides, Fritz?
That's a very good question.
Do I just say next slide?
Where is the vice president in charge of changing slides?
I just say it, right? It's on the podium.
Oh, over here.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, there we go.
And don't hit the red button, right? Okay, good. And so I'd like to talk to you about whether we're going to go back to the way we've been doing things in the past or whether we do things differently. And in water infrastructure, there's no guarantee that you start bringing about major changes just because you've hit a time of crisis, because these systems tend to return to their original state and people do things the way they've always known how to do them, because changing water systems is hard. When water systems change, it's because they're no longer able to meet people's needs and major changes happen. And when those changes happen, they happen very quickly. So in Water 4.0, I talked about the 3 revolutions that have already happened and the 4th one that I see around the corner. The first revolution in water systems was the creation of imported water systems, and we can give the Romans credit for this. Back in the time when cities grew quickly and we finally had groups of people living in large communities, maybe exceeding 1 million people, we were no longer able to provide for their water needs simply by tapping the local environment, the groundwater and rivers. And so the Romans came up with a system of importing water into their cities. And at the height of the Roman Empire, they were delivering something like 100 gallons per person per day to the citizens of Rome. That really made it possible for people finally to live in big cities. The Romans also gave us another innovation that's often not very well appreciated, and that's the sewers to dispose of the water after it's done. So this Roman idea of the first water revolution is at the heart of all of our world's water infrastructure systems. The second revolution in water came with the advent of drinking water treatment at the start of the 20th century. As cities grew and people lived closer and closer together, and as their sewers discharged waste into rivers, people in downstream communities became sick with things like cholera and typhoid fever. And when that crisis finally became too much, people invested in sand filters and chlorination to alleviate the problems of cholera and typhoid fever. And that was a revolution, because after that, you would never think about building a city without a water infrastructure system. The third revolution in water systems came in the early 1970s when the public finally became sick of having closed beaches that were contaminated with sewage. And so in a period of about 10 years, starting in 1972 with the passage of the Clean Water Act, we invested billions of dollars in creating a water infrastructure systems that made our rivers and beaches and estuaries fishable and swimmable again. And that was a revolution that we didn't go back from. And so here in the California drought and in the recent history, we've started to undergo what I refer to as a fourth revolution, or Water 4.0. And you can see that the figure that I'm showing becomes a lot more complicated than the previous ones, because we start closing this urban water loop. We start to reuse the water, we start to reuse our wastewater, turning it into recycled water. We start to capture the stormwater that falls in our cities and turn it into the water supply. And we would no longer rely solely on imported water for our sources of water. And so the question before us today, we've made some great progress in this fourth water revolution, is does it continue or do we go back to our old ways? Because as I've tried to say to you, it's really hard to change water infrastructure systems. When you know how to do something well, you keep doing it in the future. So today I come to you not as a professor and not as an author, but as a portfolio manager. And so I'm here as a portfolio manager to advise you on your portfolio. And your portfolio isn't a stock portfolio, it's a water portfolio. And your portfolio has 5 different elements to it. And I'll liken each of these different elements to a different kind of investment that you might make, trying to make sure that your family's wealth is there for your grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the future. And that's exactly what we do when we think in terms of water portfolios for our cities. So I want to talk today about imported water, water recycling, and stormwater harvesting and seawater desalination, all of the things that we heard about in the previous weather forecast from Fritz. I'd also like to talk about water use efficiency, and I want to talk about all of these things in a different way. I want to think about them as a portfolio. And I think when we think about what's going on in Orange County, you've made investments in the past. You have a certain geology and geography and community here that has one type of portfolio to invest in. If we went up to Santa Barbara, as we'll hear about later today, or if we went to Los Angeles, or if we went to the Bay Area, they would each have different needs for their portfolio investments. So the first thing to think about is that every different group of people is going to have different needs with respect to their portfolio. But the second thing I want to think about is that as investors, you need information to make sound decisions about your portfolio. The other thing that you have to realize is that you can make investments in making those different options within your portfolio more effective. And by doing research and development, by investing in experiments and demonstration projects, you can create a more robust portfolio that you can have more confidence in. So let's take a little health check of our portfolio and think about how we might go about making these investments now that the sun is shining again. And I want to start with imported water. So we just heard about our decaying water infrastructure in California. When we think about issues like the water fix, when we think about issues like restoring our dams and reservoirs, we recognize that the price tag for this is in the tens of billions of dollars. That translates to thousands of dollars for every person in California over the coming generations, just to keep the portfolio operating the way it was before. Now, this imported water system has worked pretty darn well for us over the past generation, but I liken the imported water portfolio to blue chip stocks that might be sitting in your portfolio. Maybe it's Disney stock, or maybe it's stock in a retailer like Gap or something like that. These are things that you know well and understand well, and they perform reliably for you in the past. But as they say in the investment business, past returns don't predict future returns, right? You have to do a little bit of investment. And as things are changing, as people are staying home and playing video games and buying online clothing, maybe bricks and mortar retail and theme parks won't be a great investment in the future, and maybe they're going to have to change if they're going to return the way they did in the past. So I want to think about imported water infrastructure and the risks that are facing it. So in addition to just the investment that we need to make on the scale of tens of billions of dollars to keep things operating the way that they have in the past, we have a new risk. And for imported water infrastructure, that's the risk of climate change. So climate change predictions show us that in the coming decades, the storm tracks hitting California might end up hitting further north and dumping the water in places where we're not set up to capture it. And as it becomes warmer, there's going to be lower yields of that water making it to our reservoirs, and demand is going to increase for agriculture. And maybe even more importantly, we're going to have less snowpack in the mountains. So by the end of the 21st century, depending upon what our decisions are about how we respond to climate change, we're going to have a decreased snowpack in California's mountains. And that decreased snowpack is also going to exist in the Colorado Rockies. And there's going to be a general drying of the West according to all of the best predictions. So if we're starting to make investments of tens of billions of dollars in our imported water infrastructure in the coming decades, we have to recognize that it might not yield as much water as it did in the past. So kind of in this area of this blue chip stock, of course, we're going to have to rely on imported water in the future, but we have to recognize its limitations, and we have to be realistic about how much it's going to yield us. So we can't rely on this one source of water alone. Let's take a look at water reuse. To continue the analogy of a stock portfolio again, water reuse or water recycling is like the iPhone. It's your Apple stock. It's returned very well for you in the past generation. It's done incredible things, and it's been a really good investment. But now everyone's got an iPhone in their pocket. Who are the next iPhones? Where is this market going to expand in the future? How is this going to be a valuable stock now that it's completely built out? And that's the case here in Orange County. There really isn't a lot more wastewater left to recycle. So the idea that Orange County has taken of water reuse, that is taking municipal wastewater effluent and cleaning it up to the point where it can be put back into the drinking water supply, is the way that most people are thinking about water reuse now. So 20 years ago, people were still taking water and recycling it and building golf courses and using it for highway median landscaping. But now the Orange County model is spreading throughout California and throughout the world. So what we do is we take wastewater effluent, we put it through the reverse osmosis process, we pass it in front of UV lights and hydrogen peroxide, and we return it to the drinking water supply. And if you're fortunate enough to be Orange County and Orange County Water District, you put it into the aquifer laying underneath your treatment plant. And you can do this in places like the Inland Empire or West Basin in West Los Angeles. But if you're San Diego and you don't really have a groundwater aquifer to speak of, or if you're the city and county of Los Angeles and you'd have to send this water all the way into the San Fernando Valley to get it back into the drinking water aquifer, you're facing a problem. And so in the question of where water reuse goes in the coming decades really is going to be tied to this fork in the road that we're at. The fork in the road is basically, what do the cities that aren't already recycling water and putting it into their aquifers going to do? On the one hand, we have one model which involves a whole lot of pipes, basically building a pipe network to get water from Long Beach or from LAX all the way into the San Fernando Valley, or in the case of San Diego, getting it up to their reservoirs. Or taking the path of direct potable water reuse and recycling this water directly into the distribution system. As we heard, the expert panel for the state of California has advised the state that it may be possible to permit direct potable reuse facilities in the future, but there's still a lot of research and development and experimentation to go before we should be making large investments in this technology. Let's think about the third one. Stormwater harvesting. We heard about stormwater harvesting in the forecast. I would liken stormwater harvesting to a tech startup like Instagram. The public's really excited about this. It has the potential for great returns on investment in the future, but the professionals look at this and say, maybe it's not everything that's cracked up to be and it's just going to fizzle out. I think we have to look at stormwater harvesting with this view because we live in a Mediterranean climate where it's very challenging to harvest stormwater and get it back into the water supply. For many generations, stormwater was a nuisance. It was going to flood our cities. It was going to cause catastrophic problem. It was going to pollute our beaches, and that's how we built our infrastructure. And so when we think about stormwater harvesting and stormwater capture, we're not talking about building systems like what they have in Seattle to capture the little misty rain that falls in the winter. We're talking about capturing these big California storms that we encounter every winter. Now, one of the best examples of stormwater capture is a project that's being built in Burbank called the Rory M. Shaw Wetland Park by the City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles. And what they're doing is they're repurposing an abandoned gravel quarry to capture the rainwater that falls in the neighborhood. They hold on to this rainwater and they pass it through a constructed wetland and then percolate it into the groundwater. And what we've learned in our research is that this stormwater isn't as clean as you hope it would be because it falls in a neighborhood and falls very quickly, and it scours the ground surfaces and it scours the roads and carries contaminants with it. And so one of the big challenges here has been developing passive ways of treating the stormwater before percolating into the aquifer, so we're not introducing contaminants into the water supply as we harvest the stormwater. But the other thing we have to recognize is that stormwater harvesting is a real heavy lift. Here's a picture of the LA River in January during some of those storms. We're not talking about a benign, small amount of rain falling that makes it easy to capture. We're talking about something that can really be quite dangerous if we don't manage it correctly. So I would say that this is still an unproven technology in many ways when we think about the applications to Southern California. The fourth one, the fourth area of our water portfolio that we might want to think about is seawater desalination. And carrying the portfolio analogy further again, seawater desalination is like Tesla. It's really cool technology. It's developed faster than anyone thought it could, but we're still not sure that everyone's going to want one of these in their driveway because they're still quite expensive. And that's the case with seawater desalination around the world. People who are wealthy and desperate build seawater desalination plants. People who are creative and resourceful do everything they can to avoid building desalination plants. So here's the Carlsbad seawater desalination plant. 50 million gallons of water a day. It's delivering it just as planned, but it's among the most expensive sources of water in California. And so if seawater desalination is going to be an important part of our water portfolio in the future, we need to think about ways to make it less expensive. Because as it stands now, we might just have the same experience that they had in Australia, where every major city built one seawater desalination plant and stopped there because they could come up with ways that were a lot more cost-effective for delivering water to their portfolio. And so thinking about this issue of seawater desalination and how to make it really cost competitive was something that happened during the Obama administration. During the last few years, the White House had an initiative that they called the Pipe Parity Challenge. And it was inspired by a trip to Israel that Secretary Moniz made, where he saw that the Israelis were delivering desalinated seawater to their drinking water supply at a much lower price than what we do here in California with the desalination plant at Carlsbad. And we'll hear about that at lunchtime with the remarks from our lunchtime speaker. But the idea here is that it's not a magic kind of seawater desalination membrane or a new kind of treatment, but it's taking all of the elements of a seawater desalination plant, from the capital costs to the operating costs to the permitting costs and all the other aspects of desalination, and looking at them and making them all all less expensive. And the goal that was set by the president's office was to reduce the cost of seawater desalination by 75%. And there was a program in the Department of Energy designed to fund what they called a desalination hub to make this possible in California, the same way that they'd reduced the cost of rooftop solar in the first part of the Obama administration. The last of these portfolios that we might think about is water use efficiency. And I would make the analogy with water use efficiency to a pharmaceutical company, maybe like a Genentech or something like that. It's delivered some blockbuster drugs in the past, but we're not sure if there's anything good in the pipeline anymore. And that's the case with water conservation in California. Much of the progress that we made in the days before the revolution came from building new dams and reservoirs and creating better conservation programs. And a lot of the secret of California's success in delivering waters to its cities has been the gradual implementation of water conservation. Here's a figure from the Pacific Institute from 2007 showing some southwestern utilities and the per capita water use in gallons per day. The darker blue bars indicate the water use indoor, and the light blue indicates outdoor water use. So the first thing you'll see is that indoor water use among southwestern utilities is about 60 gallons per person per day, and the most efficient that you could expect based upon performance in other countries is around 40 gallons per day. And in the last 10 years, we've made a lot of progress to going from 60 to 40 gallons per person per day, and we've probably locked in that change, as we saw in Fritz's remark, that our efficient cities, as new houses get built and old plumbing gets replaced, will probably be using about 40 gallons per person per day indoors. And outdoors, as we've all experienced during the drought of the last few years, we've severely reduced the amount of lawn space and switched over to California-appropriate landscaping. So the question before us is not how much more we can take the strategies we've been using over the past 20 years and keep turning the crank on them. The question is, what's the next blockbuster for water conservation in our future? And I would say that the next thing in the pipeline for us is this idea of hybrid distributed water recycling systems. So if you look north to San Francisco, you'll see the city of San Francisco is requiring new buildings that are being constructed in the central business district to do in-building water recycling. And this isn't a water recycling that's creating a new resource like we've done in Orange County, or it's not a way of making the sewage collection and water delivery system going away. It's a way to reduce the water footprint of people living in a city. So maybe with gray water recycling and in-building water recycling, that's the next forefront to reduce per capita water use. And with those kinds of technologies, I think we could make the same sort of advances that we have over the past 3 decades in water conservation in the traditional way. So the sun is shining here in California, and it's our opportunity to make a difference. As your portfolio manager, I would advise you to be responsible in your diversification strategy. So clearly, we wouldn't want to keep investing in only 1 or 2 forms of water. When we make investments in imported water, we really need to be realistic about the future climate scenarios and what it's going to mean for our ability to rely upon those imported water systems. So in some ways, the drought is really just a wake-up call for the climate that's going to develop over the next 5 decades. And we also have to have a realistic view of some of the barriers to the new approaches that are being touted as being our solutions. So I showed you stormwater capture, for example, and I would say there are a lot of barriers to stormwater capture. It's very attractive as a politician to get behind stormwater capture because it sounds logical to the public. But from the engineer's standpoint, there's still a lot of barriers, technical barriers that have to be overcome. And that's true of the other technologies as well. The other thing I wanted to share with you is this idea of what we do when the sun is shining. So when the sun was shining on President Kennedy in 1962, he used it as an opportunity to create an initiative called the Office of Saline Waters. And the Office of Saline Waters greatly increased the amount of funding for water reuse. And one of the results of that was a scientist at UCLA came up with the reverse osmosis membrane. So the sun is shining on us, and we have a need not only to invest properly, but to invest in research and development. And I'm particularly concerned with the stand of the federal government about federal research investment, because what I'm hearing out of Washington is severe cuts to DOE basic research is where that water hub would have come from. I'm hearing about cuts to the National Science Foundation. I'm hearing about cuts to the Environmental Protection Agency. And all of those make me think that the kinds of things that we're supposed to be doing when the sun is shining may not happen. So it's up to us as the generation that is here thinking about the future, the way in which Orange County's water district and elected officials thought about it in the early 60s and created the system we have today. It's up to us to think about this next generation. So direct potable reuse, it needs to be implemented, but there's still a fair amount of research that has to be done to make sure it's done properly. Stormwater capture has to be more than capture. It has to capture, treat the water, and recharge it effectively. Desalination, we can't be content with the kind of desalination technology that's being marketed to us now. We have to find ways to manufacture desalination plants more effectively. We have to find ways to permit them and operate them more effectively, or they're always going to be the Tesla in the driveway of our neighbor. And with these decentralized systems that I mentioned have a great deal of potential. It's a new industry that might develop, but it still needs a fair amount of R&D to make the jump to being something we do. So with that, I thank you for your attention and welcome any questions.
That was awesome, David.
Thank you.
Really a concise and easy to understand overview. But here's a question for you. Now that we're sort of out of this immediate drought situation, does it become a tougher political thing to do to impress upon Washington and our state government that we need to continue to spend on refurbishing infrastructure and those kinds of things? And a second part of that question would be, it becomes a PR problem to keep people's awareness raised about water conservation and those types of things. What are your comments about that?
Well, Fritz, as you probably realize, if it's not new, it's not news. And so, of course, keeping the public engaged in it is a constant struggle. But I've been heartened by what I hear out of Sacramento. The governor and Felicia Marcus at the regional board have been very good in their messaging of saying that the drought was a wake-up call to get us ready for the future. So what I see happening now is that water and water infrastructure becomes the place where climate change starts to bite. And people understand well that if the climate's changing and it means less water, that could affect the economic prospects of the entire state. So I think the messaging has to shift from less rain is falling, we're in the middle of a drought, to this is the new normal that we can expect in the future, and we could find more effective ways of ensuring that our water system is secure if we start making those investments over a generation. The same way we're doing it with our energy infrastructure, the same way we're rebuilding our transportation system. These are things that we do because the sun's shining and we care about the next generation.
One other question, and then we'll go to the audience. Just something because you mentioned it a couple of times, and plus this structure is very near my office. I work at Universal Studios, his new groundwater capture place in Burbank. You said that because of geography and other reasons, groundwater, runoff is really a difficult thing. But is there any way we can marry the two things that we need to do, which is to replenish the groundwater and the capture? Where do we stand in that technology and the state's will to make that happen?
Well, it's not a coincidence that that capture facility is in Burbank, and it's not a coincidence that there's a gravel quarry on top of it, because that's a part of the city where the ground was so porous that it was easy to get water into the ground quickly. So we have to develop these projects particularly in the recharge zones, the area where the ground is quite permeable. And the challenge that we're facing is that land, as everyone knows, in California is quite expensive. And so we have to find cost-effective ways to create these structures that are going to capture large amounts of water. And it's likely that we'll mainly build them in places where the ground is quite permeable already. So it's an opportunity to create parks and open spaces, and anyone who's been in that area around Burbank Airport knows that there's not a lot of places for people to go and enjoy recreation or to have trees and plants that cool the hot valley weather. And so that's, I think, where we're going to go in the future, is marrying this idea to the idea of creation of parks and cultural amenities and building them in places where they're most practical to recharge the drinking water aquifer.
And I think the exhaustion of the groundwater is an even bigger issue up in the Central Valley and the agricultural areas where the ground's actually sinking up there. It's a bigger issue for them. Let's take some questions from folks at the tables. There are a couple of microphones there. This is going to work like C-SPAN. Just approach the microphone and be really intelligent.
Wait, people fall asleep watching C-SPAN.
Where are they? Say it again?
People fall asleep watching.
People fall asleep. We're not going to let you fall asleep. I think, do we have there's one right over here, and where's the other one? Right here in the back. We have a human holding that microphone. Any questions?
Over here.
Yeah.
Dr. Sedlak, thank you very much. Jim Leach, Santa Margarita Water District. I enjoyed your presentation very much. I specifically enjoyed the way in which you characterized the different pieces of the portfolio and where those fall into our understanding of technology. Where would you put the water fix? Where would you put that conveyance from where there is rain, a lot of it, routinely, to here where there's not so much?
Well, it's another one of these things that you do when the sun's shining, because if the levees undergo a catastrophic failure, the delta is going to be out of action for a few years. So I think really it's a question not of if you fix it, it's a question of when and how. And so we can either make the investment now in keeping the status quo, or we can wait until the levees fail, muddle through a few years of saline water in the delta, and then find some way to plumb the water around in a makeshift manner. I think the relevant question for the water fix is exactly how big it is and what fraction of the water fix goes to agriculture and who pays for it. So I think for cities, if they're just building the piece of the water fix that provides their urban water supply, that seems like a reasonable investment because they're going to have to spend the money later anyway. If they're also fixing the delta to make it feasible for agriculture to have that water, there's a question of equity and who pays statewide.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We have to achieve symmetry. Anybody on this side of the room here?
Yeah, over here.
There we go.
Good morning. I'm Nicholas Dibbs, teacher educator. I would like you to address the issue of climate change. If the sea level were to rise due to the melting of the ice caps, even if it was only a meter, what's that going to do to the delta and our infrastructure, and what can we do to, or what do you see on the horizon addressing that issue? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's not an issue of if, it's when, because between existing sea level rise and the continued expansion due to thermal equilibration of the ocean, the sea level is going to rise for the next 1,500 years, even if we fix the climate change problem today. So we have to be prepared to adapt for changing climate, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. With respect to our water supply, the place where sea level rise is likely to be most important is in the delta, where the delta islands are already under stress due to land subsidence, and this additional sea level rise is going to exacerbate the problem. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it's just going to make this failure of the delta islands happen sooner. And so it kind of makes the clock tick a little faster on the issue of the delta fix. And I'm not great at reading the cards of where this is all going, but let's assume that the delta fix doesn't happen under Governor Brown's administration, which seems like that's a feasible outcome. Then we're going to have to rethink about it under the next administration and decide whether it happens. If we don't get our act together and build it before sea level rise or an earthquake earthquake or some other factor causes a failure, like I said, we're going to have to muddle along for a few years and try to kind of plumb our way out of it. I think that's the biggest risk to our water supply. Our wastewater infrastructure and our coastal environment is going to have to be rethought, and that's like a whole nother set of issues. But because coastal land in California is so valuable, I'm not actually all that worried about it, because I think we'll make large investments because there will be a lot of important real estate at risk and influential people who have an interest in making sure that it stays there.
Could we give Dr. David Sedlak a big round of applause for a great presentation? Thank you so much. It was awesome, David. I'll just take that up your hand.